right. We are live. Okay. Let me see. Yes. Okay. So, hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of From Emergence to Convergence series. In this session, I have the pleasure to have Professor Karen Hold with me, my good friend and colleague. She's been working with us since 2017. And she's teaching design thinking in our Paris campus, also in our Morocco campus. In addition to that, Karen and I have been working on several hackathons and projects in which Karen has played a key role in designing the hackathons, in supporting participants, in designing the whole experience for participants, in which about which we are going to hear a bit more. And so before we start, I give a quick background about this series for those who are joining us for the first time. So I basically started this series a couple of months back, earlier this year. And the idea is to bring technology, circular economy, and sustainable competitiveness as the main themes. And then we talk about digital transformation, digital economy, business model innovation, United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, environmental, social, and governance strategies, regulatory frameworks, policy strategies and initiatives, and many subjects and disciplines that support these topics, such as design thinking. So in this series, so far we have scratched the surface on microeconomics of competitiveness, on technologies such as blockchain, artificial intelligence, IoT, extended reality, and several X-tech industries. And we still have a long list of interesting topics to cover in the next episodes. So stay tuned. I will share a link here on the chat for those of you who would like to subscribe to our mailing list to receive invitations in case you miss our LinkedIn posts about the upcoming episodes and events. So the plan for this session today is that we will have Karen starting with introducing herself and some part of the great work that she does in several dimensions as a field expert. And then Karen will also kindly present her newly launched book that she co-authored with Jean Lietka and Jessica Aldrich. And then we jump into the discussions around the challenges with designing the digital enablers of circular economy, business model innovation, sustainable competitiveness, and how basically design thinking can help us with those challenges. So before further ado, Karen, I kindly invite you to take the stage and introduce yourself and the context of your work that we are doing together at the school, or you're doing with companies and organizations.
Thank you, Saman. It's so great to be here. Hi, everyone. I am based in Washington, D.C. in the United States, and I spend my day building creative capacity in individuals, in organizations, and in cities, especially here in Washington, D.C. So I build creative capacity in individuals as a professor and also as a consultant, working directly with companies to build their design thinking capabilities, using a lot of the things that we're going to talk about today. I also help entire organizations build and leverage the diverse skills on their team to build their organizational innovation capacity. And then I do the same thing in Washington, D.C., trying to engage our community members who have a sphere of influence to try and make change using the tools of design thinking to make change within their particular sphere of influence. I grew up in Washington, but moved away for about 15 years. And when I came back, our city had changed and I had changed. Living in a small town, because I lived in a very rural area, we had a sense of community that was the first time I'd ever experienced. I didn't experience that living in Washington. And so when I came back, I saw a lot of societal issues that our small town would probably have addressed on a small scale level because we had this sense of community. And we didn't have that sense of community here in Washington. And so I was able to sleep at night after knowing that I could equip people with the tools of innovation to help them understand the problems that they saw in our city and then could make positive change for social impact in our city. So we have a group of around 5,000 people in our community in Washington, D.C. who are actively using the tools of design thinking to make change.
Thank you very much, Karen. So as a brief context also, we have worked together 2 consecutive years at Mcgill Global Retail Challenge, bringing design thinking technology and business model innovation together for solutions, innovative solutions in retail industry. We had, I think it was this year with London School of Economics around circular fashion. I can't recall the name of the challenge. And then we had 3 years with Finastra, our partner in FinTech, a global company, a multinational company, and in which we worked on financial and social inclusion, bias in AI, and women empowerment. And so we have worked on very interesting projects so far, and I hope that we will have Karen's support in the upcoming challenges and hackathons that we will run going forward. So just a quick note to participants, kindly submit your questions anytime in the chat or in the Q&A section, ideally in the Q&A section, and we can use the chat section to share links if anything comes up to your mind or any ideas that you would like to share with us. So we will take the questions either in the middle of the session, if they are in line with what we are talking about at that time. If not, we will keep it for the end. So the design of this episode and also this series is really interactive in the sense that we look forward to hearing your insight, questions, anything you would like to add to the discussion. So please feel free to submit your questions anytime that they come to your mind. So Karen, now tell us about your book.
Well, as my co-author, Jean Litka, told me before we even started writing the book, she said, Karen, most authors write books to answer their own questions. And that was certainly the case for me. I spent some time at Procter & Gamble almost 30 years ago, working on the Folgers coffee brand as part of the brand team at Folgers. And at the time, Folgers was, this was in the early 90s, Folgers was the biggest coffee brand in America. And Starbucks was a regional business. It was focused in the Pacific Northwest. It was a small brand. It was close to a $165 million business, which isn't insignificant, but it isn't the scale of the business that it is today. And Folgers was close to $1 billion brand. And the younger members of the brand team knew that there was something about this Starbucks offering that we should pay attention to, but we couldn't get our senior team to pay attention to Starbucks. And the reason is that we relied on Nielsen syndicated data, which is data that measures grocery store sales, club store sales, mass merchandisers, and convenience stores for all of our decision making. We were a very data-driven company, and we relied on Nielsen to make all of our decisions. And Starbucks wasn't showing up on our radar. It wasn't showing up on Nielsen. And the reason is that it was sold through other distribution channels. It was sold through these coffee houses. But we managed to convince them to send a team of people out to Seattle. They drove around to 25 different coffee houses, and ultimately came back to headquarters and did nothing. And we couldn't the younger members of the brand team couldn't understand this because we'd experienced coffee houses in graduate school and in college, and we knew that there was something important that we should be paying attention to. So I left. I started my own company with my husband, but for 30 years, this question has been bothering me about how could my smart colleagues have made such a bad decision, because here we are, fast forward 30 years later. Starbucks is a $24 billion business. Folgers is a $2 billion business, and Starbucks creates 12 times the economic impact that Folgers creates, right? And how could we have been blindsided by this decision? And so for the last 30 years, I've been trying to figure out, how did this happen? And how could we have made better choices and become the next Starbucks? Because we had everything in place to become the next Starbucks. And what I realized is that in order to create something new, like a Starbucks, which completely is a brand new business model, you need new ways of working. You need new toolkits. And design thinking really provides the 5 core practices that can offer help that we need to do that. One is it offers a way to develop a really deep, empathetic understanding of the needs of the people that we're trying to solve for, and more importantly, the context that we're trying to solve for. We need to form diverse teams. If we continually work within our sphere of expertise and we don't work across difference, which is hard to do because we each develop our own ways of working, and trying to work across that difference causes friction and creates issues and problems. But it's so important in order to get to higher order solutions to work across difference, especially in organizations, so that we're bringing all of the skills and all of the knowledge to bear on the problems that we're trying to solve. And design thinking does that. The third thing it does is we create multiple solutions, a portfolio of options. We make them tangible and we make them testable, because even the success rate of venture capitalists in Silicon Valley is 1.7 successes for every 10 investments that they make. And these are the people who are, the best and brightest, and that's their odds. That's the reality. That's the math of new ideas. In order to, I think it was Linus Pauling that said, in order to have good ideas, you have to have more of them. So design thinking encourages creating multiple solutions, making them tangible, moving away from the abstract and making them testable. The fourth thing design thinking does is it fosters conversation that encourages dialogue instead of debate. So when we work across difference and we have that friction, we can design through prototyping, we can design better conversations that actually create more value for our ideas, rather than getting so attached to our ideas in a particular sphere within the organization or a particular silo within the organization. We actually can have better conversations instead of getting into debate. And then the last thing that it does, which may seem rather simple, is that design thinking creates this structured process to work across that difference. Now there are a whole, array of models to do this, but these are the 5 key practices that are at the core of design thinking that almost all models are using. And I've been teaching these practices for about the last decade. And for the last 5 years, I was really motivated by this question of, how do I help innovators deepen their experience so they can really unlock full potential of design thinking. So this is not a process book. There are lots of really good books on the market that talk about process, but it turns out that just using the process is not enough. You also need to have someone become new in the process of using these tools. And that the power of design is not in what it encourages us to do, which is the activities, but what it encourages us and our organizations really to become. And the good news is you don't have to go to design school or even have innovation in your title. The path is there for all of us who are willing to experiencing design. And what really matters, and this is what we are really excited about contributing to the body of knowledge on design thinking, is that what really matters to deepen your practice is shifting your frame of reference away from yourself and your expertise to our customers' needs and what they care about to really create new possibility. It's about transforming information about a user's needs into new insights, which then leads to new value creation. It's about building bridges with stakeholders and aligning on what truly matters in our future products and our future services so that we have better implementations of those ideas. It's about showing and not telling our ideas, and it's making that transition, especially around testing, from knower and being sure about our own expertise to being a learner and using prototyping to iterate quickly and effectively, which reduces risk. So we wrote about the science about all this. We wrote about why it's so hard to do, why it matters, how you can guide and shift people that you're working with, and also the behaviors that you can observe that are the real markers that a true mindset is happening. And we think these are all the ingredients for innovation culture change.
Wow, that is brilliant. Thank you very much for sharing, Karen. So who can benefit from this book? Decision makers and startups, established companies, entrepreneurs, in which context can this book be applied?
Well, I think there are a couple ways. First, we talk about how leaders at an organizational level can really understand, and we articulate the kind of support that they can offer to their organization, whether it's infrastructure support, resource support, or cultural support at each stage of the process, because we think a focus on cultivating the skills of design and executing experimentation are really important roles that leaders can play. But I'm most excited about how this book can really help entrepreneurs, because it can do four things. It can help them create better ideas, and who doesn't need help create better ideas, because by immersing in a deep empathetic understanding of the needs of our users and the context that they are that we're all designing for, we can come up with better ideas. I think it also helps entrepreneurs reduce the risk and the cost of coming up with new ideas, because when you are able to create a portfolio of options and you really begin to use the tools to detach from our old ways of working and make our new ideas tangible and testable, then we can find ourselves getting rid of the bad ideas and keeping the good ideas, which is an important part of what an entrepreneur has to do with all of the ideas that they're able to develop. I also think this really helps an entrepreneur thinking about how they can increase the likelihood of implementation of their idea. building engagement with potential implementers who are aligned and really committed to the new ideas, have an engagement with the idea, increases implementation. So many ideas, the testing process for an idea is very it's very rigid, and lots of ideas, if they don't have enough momentum, they don't have enough engagement, they don't have enough alignment with the people who are going to implement those ideas, then they fizzle out. I like to think of them, an idea as like a spinning top, and the more momentum that it has because of that engagement and then alignment, the more likelihood it's going to maintain that energy through the testing process, which can really kill ideas. And then the last thing that I think is that design thinking can really unlock the full creative potential of people in an organization and on a team. And so, making better choices, reducing the risk and the cost, increasing the likelihood of implementation, and maximizing the creative potential of teams are really important. And in the book, we talk about why that's hard, right? Like making better choices. It's the most innovators that I work with are more, they're action oriented, right? They identify with being problem solvers, but they rush to answers, and they don't necessarily really believe that the users that they're working with actually can articulate what it is that they want in the first place. So they view themselves as the expert and rush to answers. And what design thinking can do in that is really shift, like we said before, from that egocentric mindset to an empathetic mindset. And the same way with reducing risk, I think many of us, and a lot of entrepreneurs too, think that coming up with lots of ideas and a portfolio of ideas is really inefficient, and they're not willing to let go of all of their ideas and call some of their ideas ugly, which has to happen because not all of our ideas are good ideas. Some of them are not good ideas. And then increasing the likelihood of implementation. Oftentimes in testing, because of that ego attachment to ideas, emotion trumps reason, and testing is really a rigorous process, right? And you have to detach from emotion in order to test ideas and make sure that you have the right idea to work with. And you have what the assumptions are behind this idea in order to know what has to be true in order for it to be successful. And then finally, thinking about how we maximize the creative potential, our traditional advice is to focus on mindsets and behaviors, but it's not okay to talk about emotions at work. And so we often don't do this, but what has to happen in order to create something new is a personal transformation. And so we outline all of the mindsets that we think people need to have, and the behaviors that are the really markers of those mindsets in order to become someone new, in order to create something new.
Fantastic, Karen. This is amazing. I mean, the applications of what you just described is really wide and crucial to not only to entrepreneurs and not only to organizations, but also at larger scales, at national and regional level, even in policy and regulatory initiatives and strategies. So this is just great. So you mentioned several keywords that I guess it's best to explore them further in the questions that we have prepared for this session. So if you allow me, I am going to start with the first question, which is, why is design thinking an important pillar of developing the digital enablers of circular economy? But before handing the question, let me just elaborate a bit on the question and explain maybe a bit the context of the problem before we seek solution. So basically, without going much into details, when it comes to designing the digital enablers for circular economy, we would expect the digital enablers to help us break the information silos across communities, industries, nations, and regions. Because basically for circular economy, for any initiative as such, in order to be successful and in order to be implemented properly, efficiently, and effectively, we need to have access to information from all subsystems and all parts of that ecosystem. So breaking the information silos across communities and industries is one of the challenges that we are facing today when it comes to designing the digital enablers for circular economy. The second point is that we expect the digital enablers to facilitate multi-stakeholder collaboration, which also you mentioned several times. You talked about engagement, stakeholder engagement. So this is exactly the same thing, the same shortcoming in circular economy that we have, which talks about how to engage multi-stakeholder collaboration and how to bring everyone on board with initiatives. There's also a fair one. There are many actually points that we can go on, but just I'm thinking about those which would be of interest for this conversation, and the main ones that I have on top of my head is supporting the flow of materials across the ecosystem is also another expectation that we have from the digital enablers of circular economy. So Karen, how can design thinking help with the above? I mean, I know that some of these points might sound too technical, but when we think about what you just explained and what you just shared about the book, about your experience, a couple of projects that you mentioned, we can see a red thread, which is always about information flow, communication, stakeholder engagement. So how can design thinking basically help with these challenges, Karen?
Yeah, well, and I think the scale of what we're designing has shifted from products to companies to entire ecosystems, right? And so if we're going to change the fashion industry from fast fashion to a sustainable fashion ecosystem, we worked on a fashion challenge last year, and we're going to change it from fast fashion to sustainable fashion. It will take change from every member of the value chain to make a positive contribution. So that's also something that's in play. I think also who we're designing for has expanded from a single user to, like you said, an intimately connected web of people that's spanning the globe. And we have to think about the human dimension. One of the things that we were excited to bring into our fashion challenge last year was to think about the missing actors in the fashion industry, women who were working in near slave-like conditions in Bangladesh. In fact, Bangladesh had that horrific factory collapse. And those of us who are consuming, who are purchasing clothing, probably have no idea that these garments that we're wearing were made under these kinds of conditions. So that human dimension and bringing that human dimension into the value chain, especially from underrepresented actors, and the labor structure that it takes to produce our garments is important. New tools such as like artificial intelligence really means our design ambitions are limited by our own imagination, right? And the other thing I think is that creativity's never been more important because disruptive technologies challenge all business models. And design offers that radical and regenerative approach to business. So new technologies allow new marketplaces to exist. One of the ideas that I think was one of the winners in the fashion challenge last year, right, brought together freelance designers who could take clothing that had been thrifted or recycled and allowed them to make connections in kind of like an Etsy-like platform so that they could keep those clothes in use longer, but revamp them into a style that that somebody wanted. So I think design has the power to offer these new and regenerative approaches to business, and also to work across difference to make so many of these things happen, and to facilitate these that we have not had before, because we haven't had the tools to work across difference the way we have now. And we also haven't worked with intention to think about how we are going to transform ourselves in order to transform the business models. And I think design offers us the possibility to do that.
Thank you very much. So I hear, like, if I can just resume it, correct me if I'm wrong, but basically design thinking provides like an empathic approach to the challenges that are identified. And starting from understanding the pain points and bottlenecks in the process, then we can explore possibilities and study type of solutions that we have, like first understanding the underlying factors that in this particular example that block the flow of information and the transition to the circular economy. So is that right?
Yeah. Yes. I mean, when we were thinking about all these interconnected stakeholders, and we introduced the human dimension, instead of thinking about these stakeholders as just part of a process, but we reintroduced the human dimension into it, we begin to think about what is the human impact that we're having on players downstream in that system. And we can develop new ways of reimagining our businesses so that we have a positive impact on the humans in the system, or the products that we're making themselves. But just having a focus on that human dimension is an important start to thinking about how we can break some of those cycles that we have created.
Thank you very much. So human centricity is one of the keywords that also we find in this one. So again, to participants, if any question comes up, please don't hesitate to share it. I see some of the questions are coming as private chats, but please just send them over Q&A so also others can see and maybe avoid repeating them. So Karen, let's go to the next question, is how to apply design thinking in prototyping and deployment of digitally empowered business models. So again, if I may just provide a bit of context here, because business model innovation is really wide, and it's really a wide ocean, of points to discuss and to elaborate on. But here, what I mean by this is focusing on two types of innovation, basically, among many, which one is the inside out innovation and one is the outside in. So the inside out innovation is when we have the technology, or let's say product or a solution, but in this particular example, for digitally empowered business models, let's say we have the technology in-house and now we want to create a solution leveraging the technology. So we have some technologies and now we want to create products or services around the technology and put it on the market. So this would be the inside out innovation. And the other one is the outside in innovation approach, which basically is when we get insight from outside. It has a more empathic approach, but we don't know how to develop the required technology and services around and how to create a business and economic model around it. So these are, two main pain points that innovators, entrepreneurs, even big companies struggle with. Sometimes they have the technology, they don't know how to market it, they don't know how to create solutions around it. Sometimes they find the need, but they don't know how to develop the technologies and services around them. So how can design thinking help with finding the right value proposition, which connects the problem, solution, product, market, and basically the resources that we have internally, whether it be the technology or the idea that we have, Kara?
Yeah, so I love this question because I'm working on some really cool technology right now that sort of falls into this, like we have this technology, now how are we going to deploy it? I'm doing a design challenge around flying cars right now, autonomous flying vehicles, which sounds very futuristic, but as it turns out, flying cars will probably be in the air within the next 9 years. By 2030, we expect to see flying vehicles in the air. So, a lot of that technology is being developed, and a lot of that technology has the power to do some really incredible things. And when you marry design with a technology like that, you can accelerate the value proposition for both the makers of those cars, flying cars, and also the airports and the cities that are trying to integrate them into their services. And I'll give you a couple of quick examples because I'm so excited by the work that our team's doing. But we've been working with designers on how to integrate into mostly the urban areas and in the airport. And through our research, we found that one of the things that potential new users of this service and air taxis, many of you probably heard about flying air taxis, is that they're very fearful of flying. That they don't have a pilot's license, and they're fearful of flying in an unmanned drone because there's no pilot. So our designers found there's a need to increase that consumer confidence for the rider if in fact they're going to make this a regular part of their transportation experience. We also talked to pilots who were concerned about the safety because they worried if these drones were going to be flying into their restricted airspace. The fines for pilots to go into restricted airspace are pretty significant financially, but also professionally, because if you end up in restricted airspace, then you could lose your pilot's license and you could not make a living. So pilots were equally as concerned about, where these drones are going to fly. And so what our designers did is they started working on two things. One is creating a car-like experience with augmented reality so that the riders could feel like they were in a car that drives on invisible roads. And the invisible roads are created by synthetic vision technology that's built into, the body of the car, so that you can feel like you're having a car-like experience, and it makes that transition smoother from driving to flying, because it's offering a familiar environment with already established rules about, how that's going to work. And then for the pilots, the second is like this grid-like highway, flying car highway, that drones will travel on, so that they are predictable and they won't cause the same kind of alarm that many of the pilots that we talked to thought if flying cars were just here, there, everywhere, and flying around, and there was no rhyme or reason. So we've been we've been in design conversations about creating these predictable and knowable flying car highways. It's very George Jetson-like, as a matter of fact. It's amazing how those shows actually visualize and come to pass. So it's very George Jetson-like. But this can also include buildings, because these cars have vertical and horizontal takeoff capacity, which makes it very easy to maneuver. And so figuring out the highways and how those highways interact with airline space is doable. And it turns out that we can figure these things out. But before we just sort of throw those flying vehicles up into the air, these are important intentional design conversations to have around what that might look like. The other thing that we have been spending a lot of time talking about is the noise pollution of flying cars. And if there's a video on the web that Intel filmed from the drone show that they had at the Olympics. And it's just like a minute long. And I don't know, maybe I can send you this and you can send it out to people. But when you listen to it, it has this like whirring sound, this very disruptive whirring sound, like shoo, 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 shoo. And so when we talk to people who weren't necessarily riders in the vehicle, but the anxiety that was from the noise pollution of having those flying cars in the air created a lot of anxiety for people. So we've also been talking about how do we reduce the noise pollution from those flying vehicles, so that we can live in a more peaceful environment that's more similar to the way we live today. But just having those conversations ahead of time is so important to the design of the experience and the design, because what could happen is, and this is what's happened in the hospitals, if you've ever been, my daughter spent 10 days in the hospital last March. And when you're in the hospital, it is a constant din of buzzing, whirring sounds, and they all sound bad, right? They're thumping sounds or critical alarm sounds, and that noise pollution in the hospital adds to the anxiety of the experience. And if someone had been thoughtful about the design, that might actually create wellness. In fact, I have a designer friend here in Washington whose life work is reimagining the hospital sound experience. She had a near-death experience. And her life's work now is around redesigning the hospital experience so that it creates wellness with the soundscape rather than creating anxiety from it. So,
excuse me. I love the last example also that you gave, which is very important and something that we in daily life we just we just don't think about these things, which is very important. So I also love the solution using the augmented reality that was provided to overcome the bias or the fear that we have, because we always think that a car should be on a road,
Right.
If the car is not on the road, where am I going to? So that
Yeah.
is brilliant. I mean, that is a simple solution to a
Yep.
complicated problem, because re-engineering and rewiring people's brain definitely is much
Yeah.
it's more difficult than bringing up such an innovative solution using technology.
Yeah.
The
And I
second,
would say that there's a difference between innovation and invention, right? Invention is creating that AR technology, and innovation is figuring out how to apply that technology to new environments and new applications.
loved it. The second point that you mentioned about noise pollution, that has a lot of technicalities in it. I mean, that goes hand in hand with engineering and, a lot of sort of a lower level, closer to building the systems. So that was a great example, Karen, which showcases how design thinking really can be applied in several dimensions. And
Yeah.
thank you very much for
Yeah,
that.
I was going to share another story
Please.
around the TSA. So the TSA, the Transportation Security Administration here in the United States, is responsible for the security of passengers on a plane. You screen them before they go onto the plane. And what we found out is that since 9/11, the number of people with disabilities who have stopped traveling has skyrocketed, and which has contributed to an overall decline in travel in total in the United States, because the process of getting through security is so painful, frankly. We talked to people who use wheelchairs, and people who had autism. And we found that, the people who were in wheelchairs described the experience of going through security as abusive, which was quite alarming to hear, but they're required to have a pat down. And if you use a wheelchair, there's a very high likelihood that sensations on your person are heightened, and having someone touch you, especially a stranger, touch you in places that would not normally trigger an alarm, a sensory alarm in a normal able-bodied person, but do trigger sensory experiences in someone who's not able-bodied. It has devastating effects on that person, and they're required to have a pat down depending on the gender of the traveler. If you're a female, you can wait 30 minutes for a pat down, because the number of women at security checkpoints is lower than the number of men, and you have to have a same-sex pat down. You're also separated from your stuff. So, once you put your stuff through the scanning system, and you get called for a pat down, then you are separated from your belongings and your things for up to 30 minutes, which also creates a lot of anxiety. So our team took all of these insights and worked with the TSA to develop a mobile check-in. And what we found was that they were doing these kinds of mobile check-ins for celebrities who are checking in at different points at the airport, and they already have all of the equipment. They already have the staffing and the processes to do this. They also are doing it for people in stretchers who come to the United States, who come to have surgeries, and arrive at an airport in ambulances and have to get through security to get on a plane, but they have a different process and a procedure. So taking all of those learnings and taking new technology for touchless screening and scanning, the team began working on it's like a drive-through check-in, where you can basically get scanned while you're in the chair walking through, and you have scanning technology on both sides and scanning technology overhead so that you can have a completely touchless experience. You don't have to wait that 30 minutes for the pat down, and you're not separated from any of your stuff. So it's taking all that technology that's available, but applying it to an important application that can really improve the lives of people.
Very, very good example, Karen. Thank you very much. This was very also interesting to hear. Obviously, we are really far away from having properly functioning systems anywhere. I mean, anything that you just talk about, hospitals, airports, limited, able people. So that those are very sensitive topics to cover, basically. So, Karen, we have a couple of questions on the chat. I don't know if you can take a look to see if it's the best time to address them. So Sumaya is asking the best practices to develop an idea bank, especially for those futuristic, innovative ideas, which are ahead of its time. Maybe first this one.
Yeah, one of the big biases that we deal with in innovation is the availability bias. And the availability bias is when an innovator has a hard time imagining a new future. And this definitely came up in our challenge working on flying cars. A lot of people, when we first began researching this idea, thought this is 30 years in the future. This is not going to happen now. And they couldn't imagine thinking about how to add value and integrate flying cars, because they were thinking about all the reasons why this would not work, because this availability bias gets in the way. And one of the things that we did was really engage our emotions and think about, all right, imagine this future of flying cars. Imagine it's already here. Imagine that we already live in a world. What makes you happy about this experience? What makes you surprised about this experience? So isolating positive emotions to help you think about, why is this a good idea? And then we also thought about negative emotions, like what makes you angry about this experience and what makes you frustrated about this experience. And that helped us really come up with some ideas that we hadn't even thought of. One of the things that came up in our research originally was environmental pollution with these flying cars. Most of them are electric, so there's not a lot of environmental pollution compared to a fossil fuel running car. But this exercise heightened our awareness around this question about what we are contributing to the environmental pollution, and help the team dig even deeper to think about how they could regenerate energy in a positive way, rather than just accepting that, they're electric vehicles and, they're better than the alternative, right? They're better than current status quo of airplanes. And so they're actually working on an idea right now to regenerate and I'm not a technical expert, so I don't know how they're doing this or how they're going to do this, but to take the energy that is emitted from existing vehicles, buses, and trains, capture that so that the flying cars can use it, and they can actually be recharged using the energy that they can capture from the existing modes of transportation. So it really helped them dig down and figure out how to do that. So another thing that got them, we focused on this adjective of frustration. What made you frustrated? Thinking about that emotion. And a lot of them began to think, well, what am I going to do with my luggage, right? If this is a drone, is it going to be able to carry my ski equipment if I want to go skiing and I get to the airport? And so that helped them dig even deeper to think about two things. One is a separate service for luggage. So your person and your luggage could go separately. And oh, by the way, why couldn't it just be scanned at the point of takeoff and then just loaded onto the plane? And then you don't even have to deal with it at all. So then it totally eliminates the check-in process for luggage. And if you're a traveling family with kids and all your stuff and pets or whatever, it just eliminates that whole responsibility. So that was one. The other was the team started developing an idea for these separate cargo pods, like a type of system that would allow them to like pick up these pods, like take existing cargo containers and be able to lift up these pods and move them and get them to the airport that way. And then they could also be screened on the way. So it started bringing up conversations that they hadn't thought of, and still they started thinking about the frustration and the anger. So Samaya, one thing I want you to think about is I love the idea of an idea bank, because I like people to think around an inventory of ideas, because ideas that you develop have utility in the future. They may not have utility today, but if you keep them in a bank and you keep them in an inventory, they may have utility at a future time. So one of the things I do encourage is for people to keep an inventory of ideas. So
thank you very much, Karen. This is also very interesting. I remember I was reading about design for emergence, and it was actually one of the primary steps was to move away from what if to as if. It's like thinking about what if it could happen.
Yeah.
Imagining like as if it is the case, actually, exactly like you started answering the question, was exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
So it absolutely.
And then working backwards.
Yes, because it puts you already in the context. You can imagine the context, and you can exactly think backwards to from the problem to solution. Perfect. So we have a couple of more questions, but let me juggle between questions from the chat and the questions that we had initially included in this session. Or actually, it might be better if we take it right now. So Ashish is asking, thank you very much. Could you share your experience about what works well in the use/adoption of design thinking approaches in the governance and public policy spaces toward experimenting for effective decision-making, particularly creating safe space for leaders who are prone to perceive threat and panic when they hear words such as business model innovation?
I spend a lot of my day with federal agencies here in the United States. I'm based in Washington, D.C. And so I spend a lot of my time with federal agencies and also the armed services. And you're right, business model canvas doesn't resonate. It doesn't, it's outside of the expertise of most people in the government to think about business models and business model innovation. But the very clever people who created the business model canvas created something called the mission model canvas. And so mission-driven organizations still have to think about the same things. We just use different vocabulary. And we, instead of talking about revenue, we talk about the choices that have to be made for the mission. So we're thinking about, instead of thinking about revenue, we're thinking about impact, right? We're thinking about the kind of impact that we can make on the mission. And every choice that we make comes with an associated opportunity cost. We can invest our resources and our time and attention into this idea, or we can invest it into another idea. And we may not be measuring revenue as a marker of our success, but we are measuring impact. as a marker of success. And we are considering what the opportunity cost is for putting our efforts into that. So they're very valuable tools that are very similar to the tools that we use in business, but they are appropriate for mission-driven organizations. But you still have to figure out who are the partners that are going to be involved in making this happen, because especially in government environments, you're working across agencies that you may not have any influence over. And so how are those partners going to come together, and what is the value that they're going to create together? And who's going to pay for what cost? When we're thinking about this mobile check-in for the TSA, we're dealing with the airport because the airport provides the real estate. TSA doesn't own the real estate that they use for their check-in. The airports give them a certain amount of space, and they're usually, the space is different from airport to airport. And they have to try and figure out how they're going to deliver security in the space that they're given. And then they also have to work across the airlines, because the airlines also provide data about the passenger to the TSA in order to effectively screen them. So you're working across multiple stakeholders and multiple partners, all have multiple resources. And, how that's going to work requires the same intentional questions and conversations that trying to put together a business model requires. So I think the tools can be adapted. And if you're creative and can even think about how you might use different vocabulary, you can make that translation very quickly. But there are also lots of available tools for the public policy space. There's a group in London, particularly. Saman, I'll see if I can pull down a link for that, so you can send people afterwards a link. But they have a lot of tools and templates specifically for public sector environments.
Thank you very much, Karen. So another question is, I'm a practitioner and like you, a capacity builder for organizations and individuals. I always pitch design thinking as simply a way of solving problems, any problem, as such as it is agnostic to the problem, sector, geography, etc. In your experience, have you encountered any situation, sector, problem, type of stakeholder, etc., where it is harder to self-implement, adopt, absorb the tools and mindsets?
Yes.
Okay, well, that's a great answer. Let's go.
That is why I wrote this book, right? Because what I found was that people who just using the tools doesn't necessarily mean that you are going to get good results. And it is not enough to just use the tools. You have to be transformed by the tools in order for them to unlock the power of design thinking. Now, the good news is that it doesn't take being an expert in using these tools in order to unlock the full potential of the tools. You don't have to go to design school in order to use them. But you do have to deepen your experience or deepen the experience of the people that you're working with so that they can have mindset shifts and they can have new behaviors in the process. So, for instance, when we talk about immersion, we're really talking about shifting someone's mindset from an egocentric, I am the knower and I know what the problem is, to empathetic and being hypothesis driven, so that when a problem is presented to us, rather than relying on the sureness of our own expertise, we set up our users to better understand what their needs are. And likewise, when we're thinking about sense making and we're thinking about what does it take to do sense making well, we're thinking about helping people who may be uncomfortable with ambiguity, which is what happens in sense making, to be willing to step in to that ambiguity to achieve greater understanding. What I didn't mention about the book is that we also profile 4 different types of personalities that show up for innovation. Because we've all seen this, roller coaster ride that we all ride when we're doing innovation, but it turns out that we experience that journey very differently depending on our personality preferences. And we use the DISC assessment with our students at Darden, where I also teach, to understand their personality preferences and what that meant for their innovation journey. And it turns out that there are some people that we call the drivers who are very uncomfortable with the front end design because they're used to, driving towards solutions, and they find that sitting in ambiguity is too uncomfortable, that all they want to do is get out of the ambiguity. So they're not willing to sit long enough to figure out what the real problem is because they're so uncomfortable there. But once they experience the power of working with others and have a deep immersion experience, then they are able to unlock the potential. Analysts, people who have a very analytical mindset and technical skill, are very uncomfortable in the front end of innovation because they don't believe that qualitative data has value, which is exactly what happened at P&G, right? We relied on quantitative data to make our data decisions. We didn't really value qualitative data metrics as a way. And if we had been if we had been a qualitatively driven organization, we would have paid attention to those weak signals and run some tests and made some experiments in order to do that. But when you're dealing with, and there are particular industries that have very high percentage of analytical teammates, they don't want to talk to strangers, and they would rather just create ideas and move on, or they will leave a team. And I see that often in my work. They either get kicked off teams because they're so negative or can be so negative, or they just disengage and decide that this is not for them because they just can't stand the front end. So meeting analysts where they are and helping facilitate a very rich immersive experience so that they can see the power of qualitative research and an empathetic understanding is critical for a facilitator to do. We have 2 other innovator types that we identify. One is the supporter, which, depending on the team you have, they're really just trying to keep everybody happy. And then there are the influencers, who are probably the people that you know and work with, who are the people that love design thinking. Everything is great. All parts of the process are easy. And the risk for most facilitators is if you only seek out those influencers, then you never get to leverage the skills and the strengths that the drivers, the analysts, and the supporters have to contribute to your team, because you're only dealing with the people who feel comfortable and have a high comfort level in the process. So it's really critical that you engage those diverse teams and meet people where they are. And so we do that in the book. We describe, the different personality profiles. We have like these coaching conversations, things you might hear from a driver, so you can like self-diagnose what somebody might be, and then ways to meet them where they are so that you can speak to them on their terms.
Very thorough and very right to the point, also providing a lot of different dimensions as well to not only to the question, but also you answered already some of other questions that I also received here. So we have a couple of questions on LinkedIn group, but before going to those questions, let me please also ask the last question of the session, which is what are the applications of design thinking in promoting sustainable competitiveness? So again, just a brief context on sustainable competitiveness. So we take competitiveness initially, the financial economic gains were of major interest, but then with the increased awareness and so we started thinking about this the social values and also the questions of social inclusion. So then we added a social aspect to the economic aspect of it. And then gladly, we are, now discussing, we are, talking about sustainable competitiveness as a type of competitiveness in which we equally value the economic, social, and environmental prosperity, welfare, and resilience. So how can, I'm again taking a step back and thinking about entrepreneurs and people who are working on business model innovation and people who are working on new solutions to solve problems either at micro level or the macro level. How can design thinking as a set of tools and a framework can help me as an innovator, as an entrepreneur, as a company, even as a policymaker, as a decision maker? How can it help me keep the full spectrum of the dimensions that I need to take care of, the social, economic, and environmental? If you could kindly also shed light on this one, Karen.
Yeah, so I think, this is the hard work of what leaders have to do. And I think that at the individual level, we believe that design thinking really offers a tremendous opportunity to bring more strategic and more systematic thought to individual competency development, which then leads to these high-performing teams, right? And high-performing teams are the teams that can build engagement and create value in ways that lower-performing teams are not able to do. And there are a lot of reasons why employees have a lack of motivation to achieve their full potential and to achieve the full potential of the organization. They may not connect with the work that's being done. They may lack the confidence in their own abilities to do that. We hear that all the time. We hear it all the time, like, I'm not creative. I'm not a creative person, or I can't come up with new ideas. There's a new idea guy, and he's the one that comes up with new ideas. That's not my responsibility. They might lack the understanding of why the solution or why solutions need to be implemented, because work is done in silos and work is not done across the organization. It may be that they lack the positive emotions that are being trapped in a no because environment. We spend a lot of time thinking about how we can create work environments that are yes and, where we build on ideas, rather than no because environments where any idea that you present to your colleagues in the organization end up getting shot down. And people really pride themselves on being able to kill other people's ideas. Well, the long-term impact of that is that it's really hard across an organization to build positive ideas if there's always this no because idea. So design thinking really addresses all of those motivational traps, which increases both the quality of the solutions and increases the likelihood of their implementation, right? It creates the opportunity to build and deepen trust across the organization, because oftentimes ideas the better ideas for the company, the better ideas for an industry have to be owned by many parts of the organization and not just a single silo or a single department within the organization. But a lot of organizations are not set up and structured to provide the rewards and incentives to make that happen. So it can be hard. What else? I think talking about diversity and inclusion, I think this is one of the other things that we think is really important for design thinking. And it's not something that a lot of people are talking about. We mentioned it in our book because it's a great way to build more equitable and inclusive organizations, because the underlying values about respecting the uniqueness of individuals, giving voice to a broad cross-section of people, reducing, the negative effects of hierarchy, especially in the armed services where, this is a real problem. And encouraging small experiments that give more people more of an opportunity to act, all that supports in creating more collaborative and more inclusive organizations, which contributes, more than just values. It really builds competencies. And the other thing is thinking about strategy, because the other really big opportunity is rather than having strategy created at the top level, design thinking really encourages ownership of the strategy from the entire organization, which when you can unlock the ideas that the whole organization has to contribute, you're much more likely to have implementation in those ideas than having strategy performed in the board office, and then the rest of the organization doesn't agree with it, doesn't understand it, and has difficulty implementing it. Jean was actually a consultant at Boston Consulting Group before she went into research and became a chief learning officer. And she saw how consultants brought brought a big thick report and a deck to an organization, and then watched as those reports just sat on a shelf gathering dust because they hadn't been created with the stakeholders that actually had to implement those ideas. And so we really believe that design thinking provides the tools and a way for internal implementers to make that change.
Thank you very much. It absolutely touches down on the question of responsible leadership, what you just explained, in order to drive companies, organizations, even at larger scales, to make sure that everyone is in line, bring everyone in line with the values, and also have more bottom-up approach to strategies, decision-making, and also empowering people and have inclusion in terms of ideas, and also in terms of having everyone involved with the strategies. That was brilliant. So one question I take from LinkedIn. So Karen, now you're taken for an engineer for electric cars and the designer of the whole system. So you have said those are electric cars. What if their battery gets low to handle this? Like for cars on the road, we have gas stations. So I think other ways of elaborating on this question is how design thinking can help us also think about technicalities, and also is it a proper way to compare the new ideas to the old or in place systems that we have? What is the right approach? To what extent can we take challenges from the currently in place solutions or products or services and try to think about new ways in addressing them in the new solutions?
So I think that is the value of experimentation, right? I think that that just highlights how important experimentation is, and learning in action. I think most of us find it very difficult to be willing to be wrong, and experimentation really requires us to be willing to be wrong. And so, we have to adopt some investigative doubt and seek out that disconfirming data. So you're right, I am not an engineer, but I do have a testing approach to the way I approach problem solving, and I seek out disconfirming data. And one of the ways we do that is by testing the assumptions behind our ideas. And that would be one of the big assumptions that we would have to figure out. But by seeking testing opportunities and triangulating all of that data, we behave more like a scientist than a creator, right? A creator is attached to one way of doing things. And a scientist is really attached to meeting the needs of the user, and then designing and being willing to be wrong, and approaching this as a scientist rather than a creator, and treats all ideas as hypothesis, right?
Great, Karen, thank you very much. I mean, the discussion has been so interesting and vivid that we have gone like 20 minutes beyond the initial design of the session. But as long as, we have participants, interested in the discussion and asking very good questions as well. So I think we are on track. So Karen, do you have any closing remarks to share beyond the examples that you just...
that I just shared? Well, I think one of the most important personal takeaways is the opportunity to become more self-aware of how we individually approach problem solving, so that we can build our creative confidence. Because we are all creative, and innovation is available to all of us if we are willing to go on the journey. And the journey can be challenging. I do a lot of reflection in my work with the people that I work with. And it's really in those moments of self-reflection that I see the transformation happening. But it requires a lot of courage to evaluate and become self-aware of your own thinking habits and your potential biases to be able to make personal shifts that can have transformational impact on the way you do work. So I invite you to that journey. It's not there's no magic wand to make it happen, but I invite you to the journey.
Thank you very much, Karen. Great examples. I mean, for those who have not got the book yet, I think they know what to do now. There's a lot of interesting examples that you shared, some of them here with us, and a lot of lessons. Actually, one point for me, which was really interesting that you mentioned, which is also in line with our Lead Tech Global Executive MBA, and the work that our doctoral participants do around questions of leadership, especially given the context of the digital economy. It's like how to address the knowledge and cultural gap among the technology developers, solution engineers, leaders and decision makers, and the sales team and the end users, which you elaborated very well. And this is, I think, a very good key takeaway as well. Basically, design thinking can establish a common ground, a baseline or a benchmark to apply an ecosystemic approach and follow the facts based on, as you said, qualitative and quantitative research rather than assumptions or expectations from the end user or the developer. For me, I think the answers and examples that you provided are very in line with what also we try to address in Lead Tech Global Executive MBA, through our corporate challenges and innovation challenges. So basically, design thinking plays a crucial role in how businesses, regulatory bodies, and markets collaborate harmoniously as an ecosystem. So thank you very much for your time, Karen. It's been a blessing to have you here on the session with us and sharing your insights here with the participants. So I invite everyone also to, keep the questions coming on LinkedIn if there is anything that comes up to your mind. And if for some of you who are maybe watching the recording of the session. So Karen also promised a couple of links that I guess you can directly put them on LinkedIn under our event, and I will make sure that also we send it out by email to our participants.
Okay.
So thank you again, Karen. Thank you to all participants who are connecting from around the globe, and stay tuned for the next episodes of From Emergence to Convergence, and for next events that we will have Professor Karen Hold with us, talking more about design thinking and its implications in innovation, business model innovation, social impact, environmental impact. There's a lot to discover and to talk about. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
So have a great rest of the day to you. In Paris now it's almost 7:30. So a great evening to all those who are connecting from Europe, and a great rest of the day for those who are in the US, and good morning to those Asian participants almost. See you soon, Karen, and thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.